Well, joining me now, Jack Heath, host of New Hampshire Today, also Mark Serrano, Tammy Bruce, and Lisa Boothe. And Jack, I want to go to you first because candidates there spent at least $116 million in advertising. This is according to Cantor Media. And GOP candidates have spent $30 million on negative ads. And interesting enough, Jeb Bush, who said you can't assault your way to the White House, spent $17 million on negative campaign ads. And I'm wondering, because you know this better than anyone else, does this kind of stuff work with the New Hampshire voter?
Everyone says they don't like the negative ads. They get tired of them. But, yeah, they work. I don't know if they work a lot. New Hampshire's been overwhelmed. You mentioned about $116 million in ads. I think Bush, Christie, and Rubio have led the money count. Now, keep in mind, they have super PACs spending most of that money. Their campaigns are spending about a third. The big story here is Donald Trump's only spent about $3 million on ads, and he's going after Cruz pretty good. Trump's been negative on Cruz here, but that's $3 million out of his own pocket, and yet he's benefiting from a lot of free media, as you know.
You know, I just spoke with Neil Cavuto. He talked about the heavy turnout there. Just how critical is it, and why? You know, I think it's hard for some people to understand why it's so critical. How do these ground games make the difference?
I think I heard most of that. The ground games here make a difference. We're going to have about 550,000 voters in a state of 1.3 million people. That's a record turnout. That will beat 2008. Last time around, the colleges were on vacation here, so the out-of-state students weren't in New Hampshire. They're here now. That may benefit Bernie Sanders. But on the Republican side, that's where I think you're going to see the surprise tonight. I still think Trump he gets a win, maybe around 10 points, might be a little less, but I think he's going to hold on. The crowds here have been too big for him. But look for Kasich, Bush, and Rubio, or Bush, Rubio, and Kasich. They're the four tickets out of New Hampshire, I think. Ted Cruz, no one's really talking about him here. He hasn't spent much money. And then after that, who knows? But I think that the top four, you're going to see Trump, Bush, Kasich, Rubio in some kind of order there. Sanders, I think he wins big here tonight.
You know, Mark Serrano, let me ask you, because it feels like almost everyone's come to that same conclusion. Trump alone at the top, maybe not as much as the polls suggest, and then this big bunch up in the middle. How important is it for some of these candidates to be at the top of the heap with respect to the race for number 2 and this expectations game? You know, remember, Rubio came in third but was considered the winner because he did much better than expected.
Absolutely, Charles. You know, momentum comes from expectations. If you can beat expectations even by a little bit, then you can make a case for some sort of momentum. And as you know, super PACs have really impacted this race in a way that somebody coming number 4 out of New Hampshire who's got a healthy super PAC has at least some life left in him for the next several weeks. So I think it's important, if we take a look at some other exit poll numbers, what we've seen early on is that independent voters are turning out in droves. And also, as much as half of Republican voters are saying they want someone from outside the political establishment. So I think those will probably bode well for Donald Trump. Frankly, I think his endorsement from Scott Brown helps a little bit, you know, with the ground game for that campaign. And then obviously Cruz is really not a factor. Right. I think the big story, as Neil was pointing out, is the results tonight may be clear as mud for the nomination race, largely because there may be this cluster between Kasich and Bush and Rubio. And let me tell you, if Kasich or Bush come in second, they're going to owe Chris Christie a huge bear hug, because he's the guy who took on Marco Rubio, who had the momentum a week ago. Yeah,
absolutely. And, of course, you know, hearing Neil talk about perhaps Christie being willing to be a number 2, I saw him hugged up pretty good with Donald Trump earlier today. Maybe unintentionally, but it looked like an overture in my mind. Let me ask you, Tammy. We heard going into Iowa that a big voter turnout was great for Donald Trump, and we heard that all these other people who are new to the to voting would be great for Donald Trump. It didn't work out that way, but we're hearing the same narrative here.
Yeah, well, what we're hearing is that it's a big turnout. It doesn't mean it's all new people. It's not new registrants, which is the same issue in Iowa. It's people who have been registered. It's a higher percentage of people coming out because, and as we saw, and this is the key, I think, with Trump, you had this larger turnout. Many people came out because they were rejecting what Trump was arguing for and because they wanted to save what mattered to them. If we see that here in New Hampshire, his winnings, of course, it will be a much smaller margin, but it signals that something else has been baked into how he's now being perceived on the issue of respect. He's been using some vulgar terms in the last 48 hours. We'll see if New Hampshireites care about that. Also, with the college students that are there, remember, Rand Paul is out. A lot of those college students would have gone with him. These are individuals who Ted Cruz has been courting. I think calling him out of this, I still have him in that top 4, is a mistake. And I don't think they're going to go to Mr. Trump, who is very aggressively, hawkish. I think Ted Cruz has been holding back on that to some degree, and that will help him.
Although I think it plays in his favor that he has certainly lowered his own expectations, and he's risen Rubio's expectations. I want to ask you about that, Lisa. Marco Rubio, a few days ago, going into the weekend at least, had the momentum. A lot of people thought maybe there was enough time for him to give Trump a serious challenge here. Now we have a lot of experts saying he may not finish in the top 3.
Well, and that's to be seen. And look, I don't think that we will have seen the results from that debate and how voters perceived it. I think often we have the consulting class, such as myself, that has an opinion that differentiates from the voters at home. So that's to be seen if that poor performance during the debate will have an impact heading into New Hampshire. And I think it's really difficult to tell right now what's going to happen tonight. I mean, if you look at 2008, 30% of the electorate was not eligible to vote in 2008. Those undeclared voters are very difficult to pick up on in polling. So I don't necessarily think that the polling that we've seen, based off of, depending on what their voter model looks like, off of the 2008, or what the 2008 electorate looked like, I'm not sure if we can be that confident in what polling looks like. We also know that New Hampshire is kind of screwy and that voters tend to make decisions at the last minute. We also saw that with Iowa, that Trump was up by 7 and Cruz ended up winning by 3, and a lot of those late breaking voters did not go for Trump.
A 10-point swing. And on that note, Jack, Connell McShane telling us 46% have made up their mind either today or yesterday, certainly within the last 48, 72 hours. What usually is the most influential part of that? What is the tipping point for people making up their mind at the last minute in New Hampshire?
Well, New Hampshire voters, it's famous. They send a surprise to the nation. They like to be courted. Some of these voters meet these candidates several times before they make a decision. I would just caution folks to think that that debate performance by Rubio and Christie hit him. And remember, the guy who does the punch doesn't always benefit. I don't know if that, it doesn't help Rubio, but I don't know if that stops where he was at here. You got to remember, coming out of Iowa and even before that, he was polling pretty good in New Hampshire. He's a pretty popular candidate here. I don't think that debate going into Super Bowl Sunday in a snowstorm yesterday, I don't think it takes Rubio out of the top 3. That's just me. But the other story here is Chris Christie has campaigned a lot. I don't think he's going to do too well tonight. And Carly Fiorina, no one's mentioned. She might do a little better than people think here tonight.
All right, Jack Heath, you're the man who's met all the candidates. Thanks a lot. We appreciate your time.